Tonight's message is going to be the coming crucifixion, talking about Jesus' crucifixion. We're going to be in Mark chapter 10. We're going to be in verses 32, 33, and 34. But we're going to have a little background information first, okay, just to get the context of where we're at with Jesus. Now in John, if we go to the book of John, chapter 11, and verses 1 through 44, which I'm not going to read, it talks about Jesus and Lazarus being sick, Mary and Martha's brother being sick, and Jesus tarried 2 days and then went, and of course by then he was dead, and he raised him from the dead. All right. Now from verses 45 to 57 of the same chapter, okay, immediately after Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead, they started plotting to kill Jesus. And I want to read verses 50. This is 11. You don't have to turn to it unless you want to. This is John chapter 11, all right, and I'm going to read verses 53 through 57. It says, then from that day forth they took counsel together for to put him to death, talking about Jesus. Now they here is the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, the religious rulers in Jerusalem, all right. It says to put him to death. It was from that day forth, talking about from that day he raised Lazarus forth, they plotted to kill Jesus immediately. Now they had plotted several times before, but now they were wanting to carry it through. Verse 54, Jesus therefore walked no more openly among the Jews, but went this into a country near to the wilderness, into a city called Ephraim, and there continued with his disciples. And the Jews' Passover was nigh at hand, and many went out of the country up to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. Then sought they for Jesus, and spake among themselves as they stood in the temple, what think ye that he will not come to the feast? Now both the chief priests and the Pharisees had given a commandment that if any man knew where he were, he should show it, that they might take him. Okay, now they had done come up with a plan, probably, and maybe had even offered a reward, wanted dead or alive, Jesus. They wanted him. They wanted him. Why? Because they wanted to try him. They wanted to crucify him. They wanted to have him crucified. All right. So we see in John 12:1, all right, it tells us that 6 days before the Passover, Jesus went back to Lazarus, Martha, and Mary's house. And I'm going to read this. It says, then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. So at some point after he raised Lazarus, he leaves. When he finds out they want to kill him, he leaves. And then at some point on his way back to Jerusalem for the Passover, he stops at Bethany, which is about a 40-minute walk from Jerusalem. All right? So that's whom he raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of them, sat at the table with him. So Lazarus, he comes back and visits with them. Now while he's there, if we remember, Mary gets this perfume and wipes Jesus' feet with it and washes his feet. And of course, guess who complains? Judas Iscariot. All right. Verse 5, why was this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? So him being the treasurer, he thought instead of anointing Jesus' feet with it, we should sell it and give it to the poor. All right, but then I want to read verses 7 through 11 because this is what Jesus said. Then said Jesus, let her alone, against the day of my burying hath she kept this. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. Much people of the Jews therefore knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. So they came to see, they heard Jesus was there, they came to see Jesus and Lazarus. Now listen to 10. But the chief priests consulted that they might put Lazarus also to death. They wanted to kill him too, because that by reason of him, many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. All right. Now John then goes on to tell of the triumphant entry into the city of Jerusalem. Now that would have been. It says here that he was with 6 days. Verse 1 tells us in chapter 12 that it was 6 days before the Passover. Well, the Passover was on a Friday. So this would have made it Saturday, the Saturday prior to that. So the next day, Jesus goes into Jerusalem. Now, it also tells us that people come out and they brought palm leaves, palm branches, and laid in front of him. Also says that he came in on a donkey, or riding on a donkey. Now that was prophesied back in the Old Testament. Is that somebody knocking?
It is someone.
Doug's getting it. I don't know who it is. Well, oh, it's Rodney? He must not have his key then. All right, so he tells of the triumphant triumphant entry into the temple. I mean, excuse me, as he's going into Jerusalem. You go outside?
No, he's at the door. He's looking out.
Okay. So, and what I wanted to say that for is because sometimes when Jesus went out, had raised Lazarus from the dead, and had went out away from everybody, and then came back this day before he enters into the city, the chapter we're going to read tonight, the verses we're going to read tonight, are of this time between here. Sometime it was after Lazarus' death, but it was before his entry into the temple. So it might have been a week, a few days before this. We're not sure exactly when it happened. Okay. And in verse 32, this is Mark chapter 10, verses 32, 33, and 34. And they were in the way going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus went before them, and they were amazed. And as they followed, they were afraid. And he took again the 12, and began to tell them what things should happen unto him, saying, Behold, we go up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be delivered unto the chief priests and unto the scribes, and they shall condemn him to death, and shall deliver him to the Gentiles. And they shall mock him, and shall scourge him, and shall spit upon him, and shall kill him, and the third day he shall rise again. So Jesus here, it says, and they were in the way going up to Jerusalem. They were going for the feast. Like I said, this was after he had raised Lazarus from the dead. All right, we see that they were on the way, and it says going up to Jerusalem. Now, the reason why they always say going up to Jerusalem or coming down from Jerusalem is because when Jerusalem was on a hill. It was built on a hill, up on a mountain. And a lot of cities were built on the mountain for protection. The walls and people had to come up. So they had to go up to Jerusalem. Now, it says that Jesus went before them. As their guide, as their leader. And it says they were amazed. Now, the reason why they were amazed is because they knew Jesus had, that these Pharisees and scribes, they knew they'd put a death sentence out on Jesus that they were looking for. I mean, it spread all over the place. That's why Jesus went out into the wilderness, it says, after he'd raised Lazarus from the dead. He wasn't around the temple, or he didn't go to the temple anymore until this last time. All right? But he was going as their leader, bold, knowing what's ahead of him, knowing that cross is ahead of him, but he still takes off in front, leader, like, follow me, follow me. And it says here that they were amazed. All right? They were amazed at his courage and his determination, because they can remember he had told them before, that, and they'd been with him when he had discussions with the scribes and the Pharisees, and if they had got angry with him every time they were trying to trick him and things like that, they were with him. All right, so they were amazed that he went up, and it says, and as they followed, they were afraid. Now notice here, as they followed, Jesus led them and they followed. It wasn't a case of Jesus, moving them along. It was their choice. They were determined to go with Jesus to whatever was going to happen in Jerusalem. All right, now they didn't realize, I'm sure, that at the time that he was going to be crucified, but he's going to tell them again. It says here, and they followed, and they were afraid. Now, they were afraid for Jesus, but they was also afraid for themselves. Because being connected with Jesus, if they wanted Jesus, they may arrest all of them. They didn't know, but they went up anyway with Jesus. They walked up with him. It says he took again the 12 and began to tell them what things should happen unto him. Now, it says that he took again the 12. Now, I want to go back to chapter 8, verse 31, because Jesus had already told them twice that he was going to be die on the cross and be raised on the third day. He says, and this is 8:31, and began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected of the elders and of the chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. That was the first time he had told them earlier in his ministry. Then 9:31, a second time he tells them, for he taught his disciples and said unto them, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of men, and they shall kill him, and after that he is killed, he shall rise the third day. So now he's taking them aside again, and he's telling them this time, he really goes into more specific details this time of what to expect when they get to Jerusalem. Okay? And we see here, saying, behold, we go up to Jerusalem, which they were doing. He said, and the Son of Man shall be delivered unto the chief priests. Now we know who delivered Jesus to the chief priest. It was Judas Iscariot. Jesus knew that. Jesus knew when he called the 12 disciples that Judas was gonna, Jesus is God's son. He's God in the flesh. So he knows everything. So he knew Judas was going to be the one that was going to deliver him unto the chief priest. Now, do we remember how he identified him? He kissed him on the cheek, if we remember. Now, that was a common greeting. Like we shake hands, they would kiss on the cheek. And that let the Roman soldiers know, or not the Roman soldiers, but the guards, I guess the temple guards, know that this is the one Jesus that you're looking for. So Judas Iscariot is the one that delivers him unto the chief priest and into the scribes. And it says, and they shall condemn him to death. Now, one thing the Jews could not do was condemn anybody to death, because having Rome as their masters, I guess you could say, or their conquerors, only the Romans could carry out capital punishment. Only the Romans could. All right. But they wanted to put him to death and shall deliver him to the Gentiles. Now the Gentiles here are the Romans. That's the Romans who he had to deliver him to, was the Romans, because they're the ones that had the authority to put him to death. Now we remember the trial. When was the trial carried out? In the middle of the night. In the middle of the night. I'll tell you what, whether it's a trial or anything else going on in the middle of the night, it ain't no good. I'll tell you that. It ain't no good. Now we see here in verse 34, and they shall mock him and shall scourge. Now he's getting to specifics here. Okay? He's getting into the specifics of what's going to happen. And how many in here have ever seen The Passion of the Christ? Most everybody has. We went and seen it as a Sunday school class here. Steve and Kathy were the teachers, and I don't know how long that's been. But we went to the movie theater and watched it as a Sunday school class. And it was the last 12 hours of Jesus. And the things that he's fixing to describe here, or that Jesus, that movie really puts it in perspective. Now, my wife bought the CD, or not the CD, the DVD that you could buy. We went and seen the movie and bought the DVD. I have never watched that a second time. Man, it was gruesome.
Oh.
It was tough. But maybe we need to be reminded of what all he went through for our sins.
It was probably even worse.
Oh, probably was. Probably even worse. But he says here, and they shall mock him. Now, you remember they mocked him. They hung a sign, King of the Jews. They put a thorn of crowns on his head. I mean, everything they could do to humiliate him, they done it. They wanted to shame him and bring shame. Now here the perfect Lamb is carrying all this on his shoulders. And he done it for me. He done it for everyone out here. Everybody out there. He done it for the whole world. Even for those that were actually doing the whipping and the nails in his hands, he done it. And that's the amazing God we serve. Amazing God we serve. Now he says here, and they shall mock him and shall scourge him. Now scourge here, it means that they were going to whip him. Now I don't know if I've always heard of it, of a cat of 9 tails. It's a whip where they would do the whip up, but like the last probably, foot or 8 or 9 inches of it was just the little strands, single strands of the leather of the whip. And on it they would weave or into it these little balls of metal and shards of glass, so that when they would scourge you, when they would whip you, they would whip around and it would tear flesh out of your body. Now I've seen pictures of people that they said probably his ribs were exposed, the bones in his ribs on his back where he was scourged. His bowels might have been coming out because it was so bad. Most would have died from the beating that he took. And Pilate, I think, was hoping, because once he beat Jesus, he sent him back. I think he was hoping that that would satisfy the people. Because he couldn't find any fault in Jesus. He'd questioned him over and over. They kept sending him back to Caiaphas. Then he'd go back to Pilate, back and forth. So they whip him. Now let me say this too. This wasn't the first crucifixion they had ever done. These Romans were experts at it. They knew how to bring the person to the point of death, but bring them back to where they hadn't died yet. When it come to these scourgings and this cross. They knew they wanted to exact the most punishment and have the most pain delivered to that person that they could. So they were experts at it. It says, and shall spit upon him. Now I'll tell you what, to me, spitting on somebody is the most disgusting thing you can do. If you want to rile me up, you spit on me. Old as I am, I might have to crawl to get to you, but I'm going to try to get to you. Jesus took it. He didn't say a word. Jesus did not say a word. I mean, he was that sheep led to the slaughter. He didn't say anything. Nothing. Not complaining. Now, being God in my man self, I would have wanted to get even with that guy whipping me like that, or spitting on me, or whatever the case. Not Jesus. He didn't say a word. He just took it. And shall kill him. Now, if that verse ended right there, we'd have no hope. But this phrase right here, and the third day he shall rise again. Listen, that's what we're about to celebrate. This Sunday is called Palm Sunday, and that's when Jesus entered into Jerusalem, and he was a hero. I mean, they were putting palm branches down like they would a king coming back from a battle. I mean, they were honoring him, and by the end of the week, 5 days later, he had no friends except the 12 that were with him. Really only had 11 because one of them was going to turn their backs on him and for 30 pieces of silver. And then the other 11 kind of scattered. I mean, they hid because they were afraid, So when this time of the season comes, let's think about what Jesus has done for us. He died on the cross, he was buried, and he was raised. But just before he went to the cross, he was punished beyond measure, just that scourging. And then he had to carry his own cross up to Golgotha. And they would put him outside of the city as a sign for anybody coming into that city. This is what you get when you break our laws. So that's why they would always do it outside the city. Now Jesus is telling for the third time what's going to happen to him. And that he's on his way to the crucifixion. Now within weeks, I'm not sure, if sometime between Lazarus being raised from the dead and him visiting Mary, Martha, and Lazarus after he had been raised and her anointing his feet, somewhere between that timeline is when all this took place. Now Mark does not say anything about Lazarus' resurrection. John don't say anything about this particular passage right here. The Gospels don't have everything redundant. You have to pull from all of them. That's why I wanted to go to John to try to get the context of when this actually happened. So let's remember, coming up on Easter, it's not just about the Easter bunny. It's not about the eggs, okay? It's about Jesus. We just celebrated his birth, but there has to be a death for there to be salvation, and a resurrection for there to be salvation. And so let's remember that as we come into this Easter season, what the reason is at Christmas, at Easter also. It's fun to see our little children and grandchildren hunting Easter eggs. Let's let them know what the real story is. I mean, that's our duty as parents and grandparents. All right, anything before we go? Before we dismiss tonight?